Special thanks to our promotional partners at the American Philatelic Society.
The APS is the largest stamp collecting organization in the world, supporting collectors of any level worldwide.
For more information about membership and APS services, visit stamps.org. I'm Charles Epting from H.R. Harmer in New York City.
And I'm Michael Cortese of NobleSpirit in Pittsfield, New Hampshire.
And this is Conversations with Philatelists. I kind of feel like you got a head start on this one because you had an hour and a half conversation with our guest a week or two ago, didn't you?
Yeah.
You called me about like, I just got off the phone for an hour and a half and he's going to come on our podcast. And I'm like, what's left to talk about? So you're gonna have to lead this conversation because I feel like you know what to ask now.
Yeah. He was a terrific. Well, before we continue, we're speaking to Don Denman of the Stamp Smarter website.
I'm sure more people know stampsmarter.com than perhaps know him by name, but I think that's a testament to his work he's done online.
Yeah, absolutely. I invited him on because it was a terrific conversation.
You were really excited. Once you got off the phone, you called me up and you were like, "We got to have this guy on." So I'm really looking forward to this one. I also want to mention Don was the recipient of the Kerr Award from the APS. Is that correct?
Yeah, 2019. He got was the recipient of the Kerr Award. Yeah,
Kerr is one of my favorite philatelic authors to read when I go back through journals of the 60s and 70s and everything. So anybody who receives his award is automatically okay in my book. So
for those who don't know, the recipient of the Kerr Award is someone who's making philately attractive as a hobby to newcomers, working directly with newcomers, especially young people, or developing and administering programs aimed at recruiting new members to the hobby. So that's exactly what the Stamp Smarter website.
I was going to say his website's definitely doing that. Let's bring him in.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. Here we go.
Hey guys.
Hi. Thanks for taking the time out to join us.
Oh well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Of course. How have you been holding up?
Oh, doing great.
That's good. Good to hear. So, to kick things off, do you mind just talking a little bit about your philatelic history? What got you started in the hobby?
Sure. I got interested in stamps when I was a young fella back in the 70s. Joined my local stamp club and became vice president of my local stamp club. And then, of course, as I got out of high school and went on to university and started a career like a lot of folks, it got put aside. It wasn't until probably in the 90s that I re-engaged with the hobby and has been fully engaged since then.
Can you talk a little bit about your technological background? Because so much of what you've done is sort of connecting this very analog, very tactile hobby to the modern world. So where does that angle of your interest come into it?
Well, I've always enjoyed machinery, and when I got out of school, after helping with the family business in the 80s, I got into computers at that point and computerized our inventory and got involved with databases at that time. I eventually have self-taught myself how to write software and code, and then got a job at a technology company as a software engineer. I worked my way up through the ranks there and eventually became vice president of engineering at the technology company, and was always interested in information technology, both as a hobby and as a career.
Great. So at what point did you decide to merge your two hobbies, if you will, and create the Stamp Smarter website?
Well, I was rolling along in my career till about 7 years ago, and then ended up being diagnosed with cancer. So I had to take leave my career and started looking for having some more time at home and battling that medical challenge. I didn't want the prognosis was pretty grim right from the get-go. So I didn't want to burden my family by continuing to grow the amount of material that I had in case my family had to disposition it. So I was looking for ways to combine both the technology and the hobby, and thought, well, this would be a fantastic way to stay engaged with the hobby, give me a distraction from the medical issues that were going on, and also to give back to the hobby that has given so much to me over the years.
Mm-hmm. So it's been a consistent progress over the past 7 years, really. When you started this out, was it a completely solo mission for yourself? You wanted to create this, or did you work with anyone to build the information on there?
I was good friends with Bill Weiss, the late Bill Weiss,
Mm-hmm.
and Bill had he and I had discussed many times the issue of some of the misinformation, particularly on some of the online auctions like eBay and the listings, and we discussed ways that we may be able to fight that battle. And we really came to the conclusion that the only weapon in that war is education. And so we set out and with his encouragement, I developed a website and began to work towards helping collectors make better informed buying decisions.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Michael, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to mention Bill later because I noticed that a lot of the topics kind of on the library that you have under U.S. stamps, he had written a number of articles on how to detect fakes and how to figure out if your coil is a fake or altered coil or created coil. So he wrote a lot of that information specifically for your website from his expertise.
I believe he had a lot of that content already developed and offered it to the website. Simultaneously, Bill Allen had his original website, the 1847 USA website, had gone dark. And so that had a tremendous amount of really good content for U.S. stamps. And we started talking with Bob and asked him about that, and he offered that content up if we would like to republish it. So I inherited a lot of that content from Bob Allen also, and that got me more interested in preserving. A lot of websites have come and gone in the last 25 or 30 years, and some really good content has been lost. You can use some of the archival sites online to retrieve some of it, but I really started digging into what can we do to preserve the digital content that's online and stop this from passing into the ether if a site when sites go dark like that. I talked to some folks at the APRL and whatnot, and started inquiring about digital contributions. If someone spends 2,000 man hours writing a book, someone who spends 2,000 man hours doing a website, should have the same opportunity to preserve that information. So that actually expanded a little bit more at the time, about 7 or 8 years ago. I started looking and thinking about possibly doing something with metadata in terms of an open standard for the hobby. In other words, when you're doing databases and you're laying out the design of the database, you're coming up with the same fields that many other folks have over the years. So having a standardization for that, an open source document, if you will, that kind of defined that, I thought would be a good idea for any kind of philatelic data, whether it's an image, an article, a book, a website, virtually everything every type of information we have, digital information, has basically file properties. And in that metadata, if we were to standardize on those things, it would allow for the sharing of that data moving into the future much more seamlessly and more efficiently than having disparate islands of information floating around.
Mm-hmm.
What do you find people are looking for the most when they come to your website? Is it authenticity questions? Is it value questions? Is it just pure curiosity? What, if you had to, or is it all of the above? If you had to generalize, what do you think that most people who Google a stamp, for example, if they inherit Grandpa's stamp collection, they Google, 2 cent Franklin or 1 cent, what are they looking for, and what are you trying to provide them?
Well, the standard identification, and then followed quickly by value, of course. A lot of folks are interested in values. I tend to shy away from the value aspect of the hobby and would rather promote the things that I feel we can guarantee, which is, history and educational things, the camaraderie, things like that. These are, as a versus the treasure hunting aspect of it. That's always an element in our hobby, and certainly everybody always enjoys making a good finds along the lines. But if I were to recommend someone get into collecting art, I wouldn't say, well, join that hobby because one day you may find a Rembrandt in somebody's attic. It would be much more, no, enjoy it for the intrinsic value of the art, and you'll never go wrong that way.
Yeah, that's a great mission statement. But talking about the metadata and compiling the database that you were talking about, that's an enormous task. Do you have any help with that, or is it just yourself working on this?
7 or 8 years ago, I put together a white paper on what my vision for that might look like as a starting point, something that could be put on the wall. And with Bill's help at the time, he was better connected into the hobby itself. And we tried to solicit some interest in it. I didn't think it would be successful as a grassroots effort. It really needed to some of the major movers and shakers in the hobby to get behind that kind of initiative. So I put together some databases that were built on that, demonstrating how the different types of philatelic data could be melded into these tables and how the indexing would work on that. I also joined the Philatelic Librarians Roundtable. It's a Google group, mostly because the philatelic libraries were the farthest along in sharing through their databases the different pieces of information from the different libraries. And so I was trying to get some feedback from them and get closer to what they had done with the global index that they had. And after about a year or two, I wasn't really we weren't getting much traction. So that effort got shelved. Although interestingly, in the last couple months, and with the advent of COVID over the last year, and the emphasis and attention that's brought to digital philately, I think that there's some new interest in that. And I'm talking with some folks now on perhaps reigniting that effort.
Yeah, that'd be a tremendously large database, if you will, and very, very complex.
You don't necessarily have to have a single database. If it's all about how you structure your fields and so that it supports the transfer or merging of those different tables. So if you have an auction company, obviously they're not going to give away the farm, but they have some parts of their data that they'd like to share. You have the certification companies, you have eBay, you have different entities out there that have all these different databases. So, when we go to build a new database, and I build new databases, every few weeks, I'm constantly revisiting, how is it I break this data down? To me, all of our data could be pushed into a warehouse in one gigantic pile. And the more data we have, the better. But the key is being able to sort and filter through that data and extract the information that you're looking for efficiently. So people can still have multiple databases across the globe. the key is, if I'm storing currency one way in a database, and the Royal in England or a different organization in Europe or in Asia is storing that currency in a different way, then we're going to have a hard time ever putting our pushing our data together. So the key here is to kind of define those fields and those data types in database world to make that compatible without there being a lot of, if you paint yourself in a corner when you design some of these databases, you'll stand little chance of ever really being able to efficiently merge it. You end up having to do what I call strong arming it, where you're really having to do a much more manual process or go through translation layers that get very awkward and very costly in terms of database efficiency.
Yeah. You'd mentioned earlier that you like to shy away from pricing, but a database this large would definitely need to include pricing. So given condition and centering and everything like that, how would you tackle something that large if you're doing almost like a large prices realized for every stamp ever?
Yeah, what I've done on my site currently is I don't assign any values for virtually anything, but instead what I do is I just use an eBay search string for sold values. Mm-hmm. And that allows folks to, for any particular stamp to be able to click on a link. It'll take them to the eBay sold values, and they can then determine, given the close tie-in with condition and things like that on these stamps, it's just very difficult to get your head wrapped around. I've had this debate a number of times over the years with different folks about, whether it's even possible to come up with a decent valuation of a stamp unless you factor in the conditions and most recent. And of course, you publish something in a hard copy, it's virtually out of date the moment it hits the publisher because new sales have occurred. So I think the best you can do is help folks right now, is point them to prices realized that exist online and let them, sort through the condition. And I also, on my site, I have support in a lot of my databases for comparing. So you can highlight as you, like in the PSE certification database, you can highlight certifications that are of interest to you, and then by selecting them, say compare, and it will then redraw the screen and show you those certifications and stamps side by side for that kind of comparison.
Yeah. I was going to mention that too, that you have all of PSE's population report on your website as well. Is that something you're working with them on keeping live, or are you pulling that information?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a real-time reach into their database, but we do it in batches, and we update that usually 4 times a year, and so that the data stays relatively fresh.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the information that you're providing to people, digitizing books is fantastic, and census reports and things like this are great. But I also feel like there are certain aspects of the hobby that will probably always remain physical, whether it's an overprint transparency or a plating diagram that's just easier to have a big printout of than on a screen. So do you see the physical media continuing to maintain its role in the hobby, or do you are there aspects of the hobby that you think must remain solely physical moving forward that can't be digitized per se?
I think physical aspects will always have a place. One of the things that frustrates me for our hobby is the use of older metrics for understanding the health of our hobby. Inevitably, when I run into somebody who says, well, the hobby's in decline, and when I ask them, when I query them and say, why do you feel that way, I get a lot of justification based on, well, memberships have dropped in this organization, or the number of brick and mortars have declined, stamp show attendance has declined. Well, those were accurate metrics to use in the 80s. But after the internet was a huge paradigm shift for everybody to in the way that we get our information. And folks, they when I query the folks that are pessimistic about the future of the hobby, they rely on those older metrics, and I say, well, how do you account for the digital aspects of our hobby? How are you factoring that in? And the truth is, I'm relatively intimate with the digital parts of our hobby, and I don't have a good way to get my head wrapped around just how big of percentage of our hobby right now is digital. We'd probably spend 20 minutes discussing that and debating what that is. But I also am a moderator at one of the larger stamp forums online, and we average throughout the year between 5 and 8 new members signing up per day. And
oh, wow.
that doesn't, now a lot of those are folks that have inherited stamps or come into them, and they're not necessarily hobbyists. They're people joining and asking questions about what's in the material they have. And to me, that's low-hanging fruit for our hobby. Those are the folks that we really need. Most of them, just to put a demographic on it, I would say are 45 to 55, somewhere in that range there. They've gotten material through the family, and then they're revisiting. Or they're folks a lot like myself and many others who were engaged in the hobby at a younger age and are now coming back in. So these are the folks that I think, and they're if they're 45 to 55, we've all lived with the internet for 25 or 35 years now. So they're used to turning to this medium to get some of the basic information, and having, being able to identify a stamp, for example, by posting, scanning an image or putting joining a forum and having good feedback in 10 minutes, is a tremendous value for folks who are used to getting their information this way.
Yeah, that makes sense. That people are counting a physical decline, but they're not taking into account the digital increase in members and everything. And we've been, I think, discussing a lot about people who are kind of solo collectors, or people who don't feel like they need to belong to any sort of organization. I know, as sellers ourselves, I think only about anywhere from 5 to 10% of our customers are members of any sort of organization, because we've looked into the emails that we've sent with people, and the majority of people who are members of organizations at least use their member number. They say, I'm an APS member, this is my member number. This is, I'm a member of this organization, this is my member number. And the majority of our customers just don't operate in that way. They don't feel like they need to. So yeah, there's a large amount of collectors out there that aren't really accounted for.
I agree, and I would say one other attribute of the digital parts of our hobby is it's, for me, the hobby has always been a little bit of a solo kind of hobby, only because of the logistics of being able to take what I've done, the work I've done, and be able to show it to other folks. Carting a big heavy album, to a stamp club or something is a little bit arduous. I also collect and restored Studebaker cars, and drove exclusively Studebaker cars for many years. And that's a hobby that was much more visible, if you will. It was easy to get in the car and go to a car show and show your car off and interface with other hobbyists, and or just driving, go getting an ice cream cone. You have your hobby out on your sleeve, so to speak. Yeah. And stamp collecting has always been much more of a personal thing.
Difficult to take your stamp album with you to go get an ice cream cone.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you're not exhibiting,
upon, I think.
Definitely frowned upon. Yeah,
And
if not exhibiting, there's not much of a medium for you to just show people what
right.
you've got.
But in the digital world, it's very possible.
Hmm.
It's relatively easy to scan your work and get it published online in one format or another. Posting pictures on a forum, finding a site that's willing to, put your exhibit up. These are all things that are very, very much within reach now.
Hmm. I think it's. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, you, Michael.
I was just going to say, I think it's NGC for coin for coin grading that has a website where you can post all your certified coins and almost kind of compete digitally with other people in collecting coins. And you can click on someone if they're willing to post their coins on there. You can click on someone's collection and see their entire collection online, and those are all graded coins. And it's there's nothing really for stamps, and I don't know, because albums become so vast and then stamp collections become so large. I don't really know if that opportunity for stamps would ever even make sense. But yeah, digitally it's becoming easier.
And I really embrace the community project paradigm for being able to tackle very large projects. I'm constantly approached by folks who have spreadsheets of information, things they've worked on for years, gathering data, whether auxiliary marks in postal history or census for control purposes. It doesn't really matter. They've just compiled a lot of information. And I want to help facilitate sharing that kind of information. And that's the way I view my site as I'm a facilitator. I don't want, one of the downsides of many of the forums today is that the forum information is owned by somebody. Everybody's contributing and you're building this large knowledge base on the forum, but where does that knowledge go? Where does that knowledge base, who owns it? What happens to it if the site goes dark? And so when I thought about that, I thought, I want to provide a way for folks to contribute rather than keeping a spreadsheet on their desktop and being an island of information, to share that, and also to do a type of crowdsourcing, if you will, where we're on these larger projects, multiple people can participate, all working off the same body of information. But I still wanted to give them the ability to always it's their data. They're the ones that are contributing all this time and effort and investment in populating these databases. So any of the folks that are contributors to the projects have the ability at any time to export the entire database back to their machine in spreadsheet format if they want to work on their own local copy. But when I first got involved, there was certain auxiliary marks and things, and somebody had started a spreadsheet. It gets distributed. They were free with distributing it to other collectors, and then everybody added their own and modified their own, and you had a tremendous spaghetti of these pieces of information that had grown apart, disparate from each other. And then you had to face with this monumental task of trying to remerge it back together. And so that's why I like the idea of having a online community project where contributors can upload their images, whether it's a plating effort, whether it's a census for registered covers, what have you. They can add it. You can add new folks, trusted people. It's a secure thing. They can log in. They can add to the database themselves, and it's a great way to vet information too, is to put it all in a big pile like that and let the other folks, analyze and take a look at it. So.
A lot of people I talk to, and particularly non-collectors, I would say, ask me why there's not an app where you can just point it at a picture, point it at a stamp, and then it tells you exactly what it is and what year and what country. And I feel like for a lot of people, that's sort of the white whale of the technological side of this hobby. What do you see? Is there an end goal to your work? Is there an end point? If you had unlimited manpower and bandwidth and processing power, is there a dream you have that you think would be the culmination of the integration of technology into philately?
Well, that killer app you're describing is, there are a few examples of that out there now, but they all suffer from the same, you can do a pretty, technology has a lot of answers for much of this. But it doesn't have an answer for the deltas between devices in terms of colors, the ambient lighting that is going to impact the way we're perceiving colors. It doesn't have a solution for detecting a watermark from a scan, or small natural inclusion that may be a factor. And of course, even with if you just looked at it from an ID or a recognition standpoint, a mint stamp is one thing, and even a lightly canceled stamp is going to be highly accurate. But when you come to a heavy cancel, or you come to a black and white stamp that's got a black cancel on it, you're going to trip that algorithm up pretty severely. So it's always good. I don't have any technology solutions or innovations that I'm aware of that right now address that. And color is a great one. I'm always frustrated by the fact that for decades color has been an identifier. Color is a human perception. It's as if I cooked a pot of chili and I gave it to 25 people and I asked them for their, what does it taste like? How hot is that chili? Everybody is slightly different. It's so subjective. And, for you, it's a sensory perception. And, what we're seeing are light waves bouncing off the surface of a stamp. So ambient light obviously has a huge impact on that. And this is an area where technology has only added layers of confusion. If the three of us were in a room and we had a stamp in hand, we were under the same ambient light, we may be able to come up with a consensus, and we can certainly, differentiate between red and green. The subtle colors, we may have differences between each of us. Ladies tend to be better color perceivers than men. They have more cones in their eyes than what men do. So, so there's some difference in individual differences, but we've kind of standardized, at least on the ambient light and those factors. But when we add in technology and the fact that you've got a scanner and firmware in a scanner that's, already, as soon as it's the CCD in the scanner has picked up the colors on the stamp, you're already filtered through somebody's algorithm on what the computer now thinks the stamp color is. And when you go to save the file, now you've got more compression and they're averaging pixels. You're getting data loss there from the original image file. So, we constantly have a lot of folks posting images saying, is this ultramarine? And it's a conversation we have repeatedly, virtually every week, with folks on trying to get them to move away from using color as identifier. And of course, the other difficulty in our hobby is the nomenclature. What one person calls red, another calls carmine, and there's no standardization on that either. So colors are, I think, one of the most challenging. What do we really want to get to when we talk about stamp color? Well, what we really wanted to understand is, were there different batches of ink when these things were printed, and how much one differs from another, from one production run to another, and were different inks used? I think one day technology will solve that, and I don't think it'll have anything to do with visual. I think it will be a molecular analysis of the ink itself on the stamp. And I think when we get to that point, obviously it'll have to be non-destructive. When we get to that point, some of these stamps that we have and the colors that we thought we had will be turned on its ear when we get down to the molecular level of the inks that were actually being used.
There was a YPLF member that I met in Omaha, Nebraska.
It was Ian Hunter.
He's developing the.
No, so it might not have been Ian. Who I remember. I mean, he was trying to develop something that would
detect color
exactly in real time. But you must look with interest at a lot of the chemical analyses then of inks that have really been one of the most important emerging fields of the hobby, I would say. It's really, even when you look at the China clay paper and the blue papers and everything, so much of the research that's been done just in the last couple of years has turned decades of conventional wisdom on its head.
Yes, yes. And, colors are just simply ephemeral. There's just no getting away from it. And, again, going back to my other hobby, the car hobby, it's the same thing. We're constantly trying to, if you're going to spend $10,000 on a paint job for your car, you want to go back to original color. That's of high interest, is what color was this car actually, 50 years ago or
Right.
85 years ago. And, you can try to match it inside of a door jamb. But the truth is, as soon as the stamp's printed within a few years, that color's changing. And even the color guides that are sold. And, you say, well, why don't we have more color reference books and manuals? Well, there's a good reason, because they have a shelf life. So even if you go with a color standard like Pantone, one of the color industry, giants, they'll tell you, no, you need to replace your color guides every 2 years, because they're printed on paper. You can even get plastic ones and coated metal ones, which have a little bit more shelf life. But those changes are taking place, immediately, as soon as it's printed. So over time, you have these changes going on in the inks themselves. We've all seen the orange inks that have sulfurized, and that's a good example. And at some point, I hope we revisit. A lot of folks will pull out the hydrogen peroxide and freshen that stamp up. Hydrogen peroxide is a bleaching agent, and how many times can we dip a stamp in hydrogen peroxide before we're making significant changes to it? And in antique world, patina is embraced. Isn't that just a stamp patina? And shouldn't we just embrace that and accept it for what it is, and not be altering that stamp because we think it looks good to our eye? So that's, those are some of the things that these are topics that we deal with very often online.
Yeah. I don't know how many Gibbons or U.S. color guides I've pulled out and compared, and the colors even on the color guides are completely different. It's difficult. It's definitely a difficult topic to tackle.
Well, I wish catalog publishers and others had never taken us down that road to identify by color. And a lot of folks, especially inexperienced folks, are just entering the hobby. They get excited when they see a high catalog value. Sometimes those are related to color. Many times they are. And, probably once a week or so, we're having to talk someone, down away from the cliff of, I've identified I have this rarity, based on this is pigeon blood, oh no. First of all, we're not analyzing your stamp, we're analyzing an image. It reminds me a little bit of having an old TV set and seeing a new HD commercial, and they're going to show you a simulated screen, and what are you looking at? You're looking at your TV set. So how good is your monitor? How good is your video IC in your computer? How good is the software that's running everything? All those things impact, and that's why I say in this case, technology is unfortunately added more confusion to an already challenging subject.
My background is in geology, and in the world of the sciences, there's this ongoing raging debate between open source and a lot of the more prestigious journals like Nature and Science that are always behind a hefty paywall. And yet these are the journals that are cited the most and are, again, it's sort of a catch-22. The more prominent the journal you want your work to appear in, the less people are going to be able to read it because of this paywall, versus the upstart journals that are open access and free. What is your take on this in the hobby? I would assume a proponent of the open access model, seeing as what you provide to people for free. But what's your take on that debate as it applies to this hobby?
Well, I feel strongly there's always a place for paid access to information. I think our hobby unfortunately has a legacy, two legacies that we're burdened with. One is we're slow adopters of change and new things like the digital aspects of it. And the other is that our hobby has traditionally charged for access to information. And that that wasn't unique to our hobby. It happened in a lot of places. And walls were built around access. You had to be a member or you had to subscribe. And that's largely been had a significant change where and our expectations for access to information has changed. So I don't see that. I would never advocate. I think there always will be uh, a room for charging for, information. And it's a question of, if I was a catalog publisher, for example, I would be looking at giving away basic information and then charging for a subscription model or some other way to say if you want enhanced filtering or searching capabilities or if you want more detailed information. Because and the reason I believe that is website traffic is currency, and you have to figure out how to get people. Yeah, there's two things that you want on your website. You want a lot of visitors, and then you want to be able to retain them. And for the longer you have them on your site, if I was a catalog publisher, I would want to attract them, and I would attract them with the basic information. Basic lookup information would be freely available. But then I would try to hold them there and interest them in more advanced features, more powerful search tools, better filtering capabilities, and look for other ways to do profit centers, and including much more advanced information. And I think that's the way folks need to think about it, because if you don't, the fact is that information is already competitively being published out there. You've got to compete. And I deal with I do La Posta's website, and I've worked closely with La Posta to get their site out. They were completely purely hard copy and have been around for 50 plus years. And I've tried to help them transition into the digital world. And we followed that model of, look, you've got to get content out there. You want, ultimately what's good for them is that interest in U.S. postal history grows. And how do you attract new people to that aspect of our hobby? And you can't do it by having a wall around all your information and not tipping your hand. Not you have to entice folks and show them how interesting and the great things that you can learn from postal history. So that's why I worked with them, and they said, well, what about all our back issues? I said, well, do you want to get them digitized? And they said, yes. So my wife and I sat down, we digitized 50 years of La Posta, and we got them published online. We've added a searchable index to it. And, those are the kinds of things that, we can see. I mean, on my site, I'm over 1.5 million page views per year now. And that was,
Wow.
you're talking about a personal site that was started 6 or 7 years ago. So, I don't, and then when I look at the forum activity that I participate in, and I see 4 or 5 new users averaging per day, to me, this is not the sign of a hobby in decline or in poor health at all. I see a lot of growth and a lot of interest.
Yeah, it's a sign of active new members coming in and trying to find as much information as they can before they need to become specialists or become interested. They're in a specific field. They're almost looking for what they want or what they find most interesting in the hobby, if you will.
Yeah, and there's still a long way to go, and segueing back to the idea of using metadata, this video, and the videos you guys have done have great content in them. And it's relatively straightforward to assign each video a title and a description, the participants, and things like, the metadata for that is pretty easily.
Mhm.
But where's the next step in the technology for that? And this technology exists right now, but it's very, very expensive. Technology to run one of these videos through an analyzer that extracts out both the visual and audio information and gets it into a database, right? So that it becomes searchable by the content that's actually in the video. And this technology now exists, but you basically rent it from the companies that own it, and it's a subscription model, and it's very, very costly.
Yeah.
So, but it will follow the evolution, and here I would say in the next 5 to 8 years, we'll see that type of capability becoming, much more within reach for organizations and companies to be able to harvest that information. And again, that's the value of being able to, you have disparate types of medium, whether it's a hyperlink or whether it's an article or whether it's a video or a sound clip. Imagine if, I think NPR had a history project going where they set up sound booths around the country and gathered people's historical input. World War II veterans and they just sat there and would record some of their memories. And that's the kind of thing that I think, when I think of the brain drain that our hobby goes through, when we lose some of the tremendous assets, folks that have spent their lifetime learning about our hobby, and they have it locked in between their ears, and we need to figure out ways to get it out of their heads and get it out in front of other folks.
Yeah. When we first started this, I think we were 3 episodes in, and I became curious of what exactly you just talked about. So I went to look up to see if there was something that could pull the audio and create a transcript of our conversations so that we could make them searchable and readable for people who either didn't have time to listen to an hour but wanted to know what we were talking about. And it was I think it was something like $60 or $75 per hour of video that you wanted the transcripts pulled from. It was just outrageously expensive, and I immediately scrapped the idea because we're just funding this ourselves.
In the next 5 to 8 years, we can do it, Michael. We can do that.
Yeah, and the verbal part is relatively. There's no magic in that technology.
Mm-hmm.
The magic comes with the visual parts. If we had a whiteboard up and we were whiteboarding things or showing a stamp, sharing our screens, or running through a presentation, where you've got that mix of audio and visual, and how is it you pull that visual part into that transcript?
Yeah.
And my last question, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Michael. But you talk about if somebody has their spreadsheet, their database where they log auxiliary markings or whatever, or even just keeping tabs on their collections. What can people do to contribute to your website? What are you looking for people to send you? What can they do to advance your mission? Is it digitizing old books and periodicals? Is it again, what can somebody listening to this go to you with that you feel would advance your cause?
I'm open to virtually any type of information they're looking to share, whether it's just a personal collection and they'd like to make an exhibit out of it, or just share the pages they've done. I'm always looking for educational things. I've put together a number of different things, some of it targeted at younger folks, in terms of being able to capture them, whether it's music videos or games, online games. I did a periodic table that has a stamp for each element, a tree of life. So things that teachers may be able to use, or whether it's how-to videos to how to decoupage stamps onto a lampshade. They're just anything at all that they would like to share. And they may not have the the understanding, the technology. They may not be geeky like me and understand how they can get that into the digital world. I view myself as a facilitator to be able to help them with that.
But that's fantastic. Glad to hear that you're accepting any and all contributions. I mean, this has been an outrageous task that you've put on. You had talked about people putting together 2,000-hour books and then 2,000-hour websites. I'm almost afraid to ask you how many hours have gone into building this website.
Well, right now I average about 1,500 hours a year on it for the last 7 years. But keep in mind, this is my bucket list.
Yeah.
Being a dialysis patient, I spend 20 hours a week chained to being kept alive by a machine. So I could sit there and watch the boob tube for 20 hours, or I could bring my laptop and get something productive done. So for me, it's been a welcome distraction, and it's one of the things that dialysis patients also face is it's difficult to travel. It can be done, but there's a lot of logistics involved. So this allows me to really stay engaged in the hobby. And I've also just in the last couple, the explosion of Zoom or video conferencing in our hobby, given the events of the last year, has been tremendous. And my local club was an early adopter of Zoom meetings, and we have always had an active club here in the mountains of Western North Carolina, and going back through the 30s. And so we looked at what we were doing. One of the popular parts was our club auctions, and so we were struggling with how was it we want to do online club auctions via Zoom. And we wanted this to, as opposed to a mail order type auction or just posting some, on a web page and people bid, we wanted to have that human element and that camaraderie that we have and the joking around and the good times that we had in the face-to-face type club auctions. So I developed some databases where folks, and logistically that can be quite a time suck. You got to email people pictures of your lots, and then they've got to be posted, and you want to give people the ability to preview. So rather than jump through those hoops, I developed a database, and people just upload their images with their descriptions, their starting price, and a couple other. It's a very simple form. It takes a minute or two to fill out. You can upload up to a number of images, and it automatically builds the auction catalog in real time as soon as you hit save. And then when we go on our meeting days that we have the auctions, I share a screen on Zoom. I open another page that I've developed out of the auction catalog, and we go through. It gives the lot number, the description, shows the image of the lot, and we do our face-to-face auction on that. Well, that proved to be so popular just by word of mouth. I'm now got like 9 different clubs, smaller clubs, who have all asked me for the same functionality. And just today I was working on one before this call. So, and some of these are international clubs, and I'm hosting it at no charge, and the code I don't charge anyone for it. It's just a service. But this is the kind of thing where people. I'm always looking at technology as a potential solution to, and that's what really throws my light switch the most, is being able to apply technology and come up with a solution where someone says, wow, this is great. This is saving us time. This is really helping us share information. That's my bucket list right there.
Wow. Well, that's been fantastic, Don. I'm afraid to ask my final question, because it sounds like you've got your hands full, which was just going to be what's next. What was other than what you've already talked about? Did you have anything that you were working on for this Stamp Smarter website that you were looking forward to?
I have a number of new projects in the works, and I am looking forward to this potential metadata project. That the product of that project will be a document but I still think that has, stands a significant chance at changing our hobby in a very positive way if we can get it out there and get buy-in, on any of those type of projects. And I learned this about IT years ago, doing different IT projects in companies and things like that, is getting the buy-in is the most important thing. The technology, the gee whiz part of the technology and the light bulbs, the innovations, all that is, that's great, but those are short-lived. What you have, and I could roll out the slickest program or the slickest widget in the world, and if I haven't gotten buy-in from the folks who are going to use it, then I'm really got an uphill battle. So, for something like this open source document specification for database fields, the key is going to be, going around and doing the sales job with this, as opposed to the nuts and bolts of hammering out the fields and the nomenclature and those kinds of things. That's pretty straightforward. The big effort is getting the buy-in.
That's fantastic. That sounds like it's going to be incredibly influential in the hobby when it does come out eventually, and we're definitely looking forward to that. Thank you so much for talking to us.
I like that one additional thing.
Of course.
Here's an example where I think an improvement could be made. Exhibiting. Okay, we have well-defined exhibiting criteria for physical exhibits and stamp shows. There's frame sizes, there's standards, there's guidelines, but we have virtually nothing for digital exhibiting. And I've been called on quite a few times over the last 2-3 years to say, well, I like the way that, you guys, on your site, you're showing, you're displaying these slideshows and things like that. Can we use that? So I think there's room for improvement in our hobby to standardize on exhibiting. Some people use PDFs and other shows will use something different. We really could stand the standardization in this area for file types, for the code that we use. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel, which is what I see going on now. On all these different sites, everybody is burning time doing the same thing that everybody else has already done.
Yeah.
And they're customizing a little bit to themselves, but so I've worked on putting together some download zip files and some simple instructions on what I feel is the most generic and simplest way to do an online exhibit. And for me, if you were to give me let's say a 25-page exhibit, I could have that implemented in less than 20 minutes.
Wow.
So these are the kinds of things that I look forward to in terms of seeing our hobby move to the next generation.
Yeah, I think there's definitely opportunity there for exhibiting to be improved.
I still do have some resistance in the hobby where folks, the internet and email is killed off the postal system. And I don't see it like that at all. To me, the internet is the next generation postal system. It's an evolutionary step. If we look back at, the earliest postal systems where messengers were running, verbally between towns to deliver communications between humans. Look at all the technology that has advanced over the years in postal systems. The Pony Express was retired by the railroads, and then RPOs were retired by airmail. We've always seemed, whether it's the postal systems, whether it's our hobby, we're always like 15 or 20 years behind the curve on this stuff. And I'd love for us to get out from behind that curve.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic that's always discussed, and how Philately will age with the technology it'll be incredibly interesting to see how that progresses, and hope that it does the best. But thank you so much for doing the best you can to aid with that. endeavor.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity and the fact that the hobby is, it's just offered me a tremendous value here, in particularly in the last decade, in giving me this something to latch on to, stay engaged, and not increase the burden on my poor family.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Don, for meeting with us,
Really
taking the
enjoyed
time
this.
out. Yeah, this has been very informative. I'll say it's been eye opening in a way.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
Of course. Thank you so much, and best of luck, and keep us posted on those new developments.
Will do.
All right. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I really enjoyed that, Michael. I thought that was a really interesting chat. And again, you don't think that, when you visit these websites or, you go on these forums, there are people behind the operations. And it's interesting to hear some firsthand knowledge about what goes into building these websites.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear that they get 1.5 million hits a year.
Unique. That's fascinating.
That's crazy. And that this forum that he's a moderator of is getting 3 to 5 new members a day. And he did, preface that with
Right,
saying
they're not all
that
going to log in every day, but that's still people coming.
Or they're not all collectors. They're
right.
Yeah.
But there's people out there who want information and who are looking for it, and he's filling an essential need. So I think it's fantastic, and I really enjoyed talking to him.
Yeah, it's a great question to be asked. At what point do we stop providing information for free? Because the people providing information need some sort of monetary gain. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to provide this information.
It's a balancing act, absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's room for a lot of different voices and a lot of different philosophies to make themselves known in the hobby. And ultimately, I think the hobby is stronger for having all these people working towards a common goal.
Yeah, at the end of the day, everybody's just trying to improve the hobby.
Well, Michael, I really enjoyed this episode. Can I say one last thing before we wrap this up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Something I posted on Twitter that you actually retweeted, so you know where I'm going with this. You invited me to a trivia night with your friends on Friday.
That's true.
And it is true. And I enjoyed myself very much. And it got me thinking, could we apply this same concept to Philately?
We could.
So, thank you for affirming me.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that maybe in the next couple of weeks after this episode airs and everyone's had a chance to listen to it, and I'll tweet about it a couple more times because that's where people go for information is my Twitter feed. I was thinking maybe we could do a philatelic trivia with some cool prizes. A couple rounds of different categories. Not even because a couple of people said I'm worried that I won't do well because I don't know so much about stamps. But I don't want to make it just about knowing stamps. I think it could be sort of cultural as well, and things sort of tangentially related to the post. So if you're on board, and I believe Kaylee, your wife, said she might be on board to help with scoring and everything.
Yeah.
Maybe the three of us could put together a live philatelic trivia and give away some cool prizes and get to know people better.
What would be fantastic is if the entire thing was hosted by Claire, our producer, and then we just asked the questions, and I don't know what her...
We should let Claire do that, though.
We should let Claire host it, and
Absolutely.
and then we can be there interacting with people.
That way, people can meet Claire too. They hear us reference her all the time, and she prevents them from having to put up with us for any longer than is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, she cuts these interviews down from
She's
2
probably
hours.
Cut this part out as we're talking about her cutting down interviews.
Yeah, she cuts it down from like 2 hours to an hour.
Yeah, so let's bring Claire into it and let's do philatelic trivia. Maybe we can even see if the APS would be on board or something.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. One of our future guests that we've talked to actually had a philatelic trivia. I didn't get to attend it, but Casey Joe White actually hosted a APS stamp chat trivia.
Right, that's right.
Well,
let's
just
I think. Maybe I subconsciously got this idea from that.
Yeah, but we will be talking to Casey Joe White.
We are going to be talking to Casey Joe White in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, in a few weeks. But yeah, she hosted a trivia. I think it'd be fantastic if we could host a trivia also.
We can just do a poor imitation of her trivia.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
That sounds like a lot of fun, Michael.
I'm on board with that.
Fantastic. Well, as always, thank you to everyone who listens. We're at philatelypodcast.com, philatelypodcast@gmail.com, all the podcast platforms.
Everywhere.
You know where to find us.
You know where to find us.
Michael J. Court on Twitter. I'm Charles L. Epting on Twitter.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is a real fun one, Michael.
We'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good, Michael.
All right. See ya. Bye.